question is, what answer best defines computational thinking? There is designing and building a computer, thinking only in binary code, thought processes used to evaluate complex problems and their solutions, and coding computer programs. So much more than just coding. A lot of people equate the two, and they think if they need to be doing computational thinking, they have to learn Python or Java, and they have to be these experts in coding, and that's absolutely not what computational thinking is. Coding is a method for using computational thinking, but there's so many other ways that you can develop these skills in our patrons that don't even require a computer or any type of programming knowledge at all. So yes, you guys are correct. The best fit answer there is C. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. This is one of my favorite quotes that kind of describes or gets to the heart of computational thinking. And since we're from the Space Science Institute, it really resonates with me with space analogies. But yeah, so an early pioneer in computational thinking said one time, computer science is no more about computers than astronomy is about telescopes. So I like this quote because a lot of times if you're new to the whole concept of computational thinking, just that phrase, that term can sound very intimidating. And so this kind of breaks it down to be a lot less intimidating. You know, there's different resources that libraries have. If you don't have a computer lab at your library, you can still do computational thinking activities just with pens and papers, just through games. It's a process, it's a thought process, it's a way of breaking down complicated problems into smaller, more manageable steps to figure out a solution. And this is something that we do every single day. Our brains themselves are little computers that we're using every single day. So you don't need to have the technology to still develop these skills and get our patrons on the path to be great computer scientists or just great problem solvers. So just a quote I wanted to share with you guys before we jump in. So I took this, some of you may be familiar with this, but this was just a great definition that ALA came up with their Libraries Ready to Code campaign. So I'll just read it for you guys, and then we'll kind of dig into what it means. So computational thinking, or CT, I'll probably be referring to it as CT a lot during this presentation, but CT refers to the thought processes used to formulate problems and their solutions. These include breaking down problems into smaller parts, looking for patterns, identifying principles that generate these patterns, and developing instructions that computers, machine, and people can understand. It is an approach to critical thinking that can be used to solve problems across all disciplines. So that was a lot, but so what? What does that whole big definition mean? So the main takeaways I get from that definition is decomposing or deconstructing a big problem into smaller pieces to solve. So I call it divide and conquer. Looking for patterns and identifying causes and effects. So these are things you can do with preschoolers, you know, really developing that pattern recognition and then asking the why. Why are we seeing these patterns? What is causing it? What are the effects? And again, these can go across disciplines. It doesn't have to be computer science. You can take these concepts and use them in ecology. When you're going on a nature walk, you can have kids looking for patterns in the trees or in the seasons. In math, in music, in crafts, you know, knitting, you're doing patterns and building on that. So it's so much more than just using a computer. And then finally, using algorithmic thinking. So that's another big kind of buzzword or big term, but it basically means just a set of instructions that you follow to solve a problem. So when you're baking or cooking, you're using algorithmic thinking by following instructions and then coming up with a product at the end. I have this picture down here of a 15 puzzle. This is an old childhood puzzle. I'm sure you guys have maybe played with them before. But when you're going through this, when you have this little, I think I have one right here actually, use these a lot in talking about computational thinking. But basically these numbers are all scrambled up and you have to get them in order from 1 to 5. And to go through it, first of all, you're breaking a big problem down into smaller, more manageable steps. So you're using that first bullet point there. You can't just automatically get it to 15. You have to start in the corner, start in the middle, or start in one small spot in order to make progress. And then once you start doing it, you start to realize there's an actual pattern. There's a physical pattern that you can go. Sometimes it's going in little squares, or but you're finding those patterns that make it work. And then once you figure out the pattern, you can break it down into steps, into that algorithmic thinking, until you finally get your end result 1 through 15 in order. But you know, this is just a little childhood puzzle, but you are very much using computational thinking skills in the process of solving it. So yeah, I like these little analogies because they really help make it less intimidating and, you know, I have to be a computer scientist. Absolutely not. We're using these skills every single day. The point is, what you're doing is you're making explicit things that humans do implicitly without even realizing it. So the main thing, these little, but yeah, so what I do, if I were to use one of these with my students or with my patrons, I used to be a public school teacher, so forgive me if I use that term, but I would have them do this, give them 5-10 minutes to try to solve it. But the next step to really make this a computational thinking activity is ask your kids or adults or whoever you're working with, what did they do to make this work? So what was hard? What made you successful? What was your strategy? And for them to actually verbalize and think about how they did it and tell you that, that's where you get that computational thinking of how they can explicitly explain how they solved that problem. So this is, you know, kind of the why. Why are we even talking about this? Why is CT becoming such a big thing in libraries of all places? So these are skills that can help in so many facets of a person's life. So number one, just building confidence in dealing with complexity. A lot of you said these are very difficult to do, and I actually get very frustrated. You get frustrated sometimes, but if you can keep going, if you can maybe verbalize your frustrations with other people and come up with better solutions, you're going to build confidence in dealing with complexity and persistence in working with difficult problems. It gives you the ability to deal with open-ended problems. So a lot of the activities that we'll be showing today, including this one, there's more than one way to solve it. Especially with coding. If anyone has done coding before, there are so many ways to do certain things with the same outcome, but with different methods. So that's kind of a really fun part of CT, is just all the different ways that you can get there. And it reminds me a lot of maybe writing. If you're an author, you can convey an idea using words very differently than, say, your neighbor would convey that same idea. We get the choice to figure out our solutions, and it's going to look different for every single person because we all have different brains, but we can all get to the same solution just on our own. The ability to communicate and work with others to achieve a common goal or solution, that's a huge one, especially when thinking about how what you're doing with CT is making explicit things our brains just innately do. So it really helps people to develop their communication skills. And finally, my very favorite part is it enables kids to be creators rather than just consumers of technology. So kids get to create their own games. They get to code their own little characters. They get to build a world instead of just play with a world that somebody else made. So lots of good reasons why it's important to develop these skills in our library patrons.